Okay, so Bob's at it again. Today we're going to learn about what happens when Bob neglected to do a little cross-country flight planning in that. All Bob did was he just looked down here and he goes, hey, I'm going from Olympia to Orcas Island. And he looked at this and he goes, hey, I know this is a line of longitude right here. See that? That's a line of longitude, so that points to north. So Bob's like, hey, I'm just going to take off and I'm going to put my mag compass on true north, right? Because that follows the line of longitude north. So that goes to the north. I'm just going to fly to the north, right? A couple things we're going to look at here. One is we got a wind out of the west at 5,000 feet, gust blowing to 20 knots, right? Which is normal for that altitude. You know, you can get those up here in the Pacific Northwest a lot. So to begin with, you know, normally you'd take the true course, which is, you know, from here to here, and you put the wind correction angle into it, right? You know, the wind's coming from the left, so you need to point the nose in the left. Well, Bob didn't do that. He didn't check the weather, so he didn't care. Bob's just going to fly a heading at 360. The other thing that Bob's neglected to do is include variation into his calculation. And what's variation? It's this right here. See this line right here? It's a line of magnetic variation, right? Well, see, it says 16 degrees. So technically, to fly where Bob's going, you're supposed to subtract 16 degrees east, meaning you subtract when it's east, it's least. You subtract it if it's west, you'd add it. But in this case, you know, it's a 360 heading, right? So Bob's like, he didn't even care about that. Bob looked at the thing and he's like, hey man, I got a line of longitude that's a 360 degree heading. So let's see what happens to Bob when he doesn't include wind correction angle and the variation into the equation. There's one last thing, and that has to do with the dissimilar metals and electronics in the airplane that interfere with the compass, and that might put it off 1 or 2 degrees. But, you know, hey, these compasses are so wonky that, you know, if you can maintain that, but it's part of the equation. So, again, we're not including wind correction angle into this flight. We're not going to include magnetic variation. So let's see how this flight goes for Bob. The weather en route today, it's clear where we're taking off, but as soon as we take off, it's kind of a low overcasty layer. You can't see the ground, so we're doing a thing called VFR over the top, right? And that means, is that legal? Can you fly over the tops of clouds? Yeah, you can. You can. It's actually legal. So that's a different video, but so Bob can't really see the ground. So Bob's just going to take off and he's going to maintain this 360 heading. So let's see what happens to Bob during the flight, right? We're following Bob along. You know, Bob has ForeFlight, but did he bother to turn it on? No, but we're going to watch Bob because we have our ForeFlight tracking Bob's flight. So let's see what happens. All right, here we go. Okay, so Bob just took off. He's got the autopilot engaged, and he's in heading mode and vertical speed mode, climbing to 4,500 feet. Okay, so you can see Bob just took off here. He's got the autopilot engaged. You can see him going northbound right here. He's on a 360 degree heading, right? Look at, here's his track. This is the true course right here. Look where he's already going. You know, you can see it right here. See this VOR radial? That's magnetic north. Bob has no clue he's going in that direction because he's just farting around. He's drinking his coffee and thinking he's the greatest pilot in the world. And he's looked outside and he can see that he's off, but he's not following. He's not using pilotage, right? He's not looking down, or he hasn't done dead reckoning where he's done the calculations to figure out that he's probably supposed to be in a different heading, right? So let's go ahead, and the weather's going to get a little bit worse up ahead. Let's see what happens to Bob. Okay, so here's Bob. Look at Bob's cruising along. He just happens to be in my airplane, 942 an Echo, right? I must have found a spare set of keys and swiped them from me. But anyhow, Bob's cruising along. He's flying on this heading in north, right? He can't see the ground now, right? So, you know, Bob thought because the heading is north, he's just going to take off and put north on his magnetic compass. Well, what's the problem with that, right? The problem is, again, he didn't consider the wind, did he? So this wind is going to take him. The wind's coming this way. It's going to blow him off course, right? The other thing he didn't consider was he didn't consider the variation. Remember, the variation is that magnetic variation of east or west. It's because true north, the top of the world is here. True north is up here, but magnetic north is like kind of in upper northeastern Canada, you know, way up that way, right? So if you're trying everything on the ground, all these maps are based on true north, and you have to use the magnetic variation in order to get the proper magnetic heading, right? Well, look what happened. Bob did not do these calculations, so you can see what's happening. He's flying magnetic north, and that's exactly what he's doing. See how he's tracking outbound, but he has no clue. He thinks he's going from Olympia straight up to Orcas. Bob thinks he's doing that right there, right? Well, let's follow along and see what Bob does and what kind of trouble he's going to get into, okay? Okay, so Bob's leveled off at 4,500 feet. You can see right here he has a ground map. Didn't even bother looking down. He's like, I don't need that. I'm looking out the window, and, you know, I got my heading a north in here, right? He's got this mental thing going. It's a north heading. I looked at the map. It says north, so I'm going to fly north. Again, the difference being true north and magnetic north are two completely different beasts, right? Look at Bob just beating the crap out of my airplane, man. Why don't you just run it at full throttle, okay? Uh-oh. What do we have here? Seattle Crest Bravo. It's above in 4.2 miles. Well, where's Bob? He's right here. Bob's right here at 4,500 feet. You can see up here, there's a couple of numbers. Looks like Bob's heading to this one right here. See this number? These numbers mean he had 2 zeros to them. That means below 6,000 or above 10,000 to remain outside Class Bravo airspace. You cannot fly into Class Bravo airspace without a clearance. It's illegal. You just cannot do that, right? So that's 6,000 feet out here. It looks like it's above 10. All of these are above 10, right? You can see 10,000 to the surface. This one's 10,000 and below 3,000 feet, below 5,000 feet, and below 6,000 feet. You cannot fly into Class Bravo without a clearance. Otherwise, that's a total pilot deviation, right? Look at Bob, all fat, dumb, and happy. He's just cruising along. He thinks he's going straight up to Orcas Island, you know, because he can't see anything on the ground, right? The weather ahead's supposed to get a little bit better, so we'll see what happens. Okay, you can see Bob's coming up right here. See this triangular chunk right here? Got to be below 5,000 feet. Well, he's at 4,500 feet, so he hasn't busted the airspace yet, right? He hasn't flown in a Class Bravo. He's coming up to the next one. Got to be below 6,000, so he's fine there. He's fine as long as he's out of this and out of this because he's at 4,500 feet, right? But let's just kind of follow Bob along and see what he does. So the other problem Bob could run into right here was when he left Olympia, the altimeter setting was 2982, right? What if it's a higher altimeter setting here? Say it was like, 3012, something like that. With a higher altimeter setting, more air pressure, the airplane's going to indicate 4,500 feet, but the airplane will actually be at a higher altitude, right? It's the other way around. If you have 2992 inches of mercury as a standard pressure, and the new pressure area is like 2982, right? 2992, 2982, you're going to be 100 feet off, right? If it's 2992 to 2892, it's 1 inch of mercury, it's 1,000 feet off. So if Bob's flying, if it's 2992 when he took off in Olympia, and now it's 3012, he's 200 feet higher. So yeah, is he starting to kind of skim this area? Yeah, he is. It's not good. Let's see. Let's continue to follow Bob and see where he winds up, huh? Okay, so the solid layer of undercast, I guess you'd call it, is starting to break up a little bit, and Bob thinks he's doing good because he sees water down here. You know, you can't really see any roads if you're looking at a map. He's not looking at ForeFlight. You know, he didn't even bother to turn that thing on. He's not looking at his GPS that shows him exactly where he needs to be going because he put in, you know, I'm going from Olympia to Orcas Island. He put it in the GPS, but he's not using any of the information. He's just looking at his compass heading. But again, he's looking at it going, I got water right here. Well, when you're on this route over here, look what you got. You got water all over the place, right? Water, water, water. Bob sees water, so Bob thinks he's doing good. Okay, so the weather's slowly improving, and again, Bob thinks he's doing a great job, but he can't figure out why there's all these houses over here when there's usually just nothing but trees and a couple of cabins, right? He knows he's over this Hood Canal area with all the trees, and he's like, what's going on? But take a look at him right now. Look where he's at, right? Bob's at 4,500 feet. Class Bravo in this area starts at 3,000 feet. So anything between 3,000 and 10,000 feet, he's in Bravo, right? Let's just see what happens. See if he makes a turn. I don't think he knows he's there. He can't figure out why there's all these houses over here, right? Boom, there he goes. Possible pilot deviation. Bob just flew right into the Class Bravo airspace, right? Now it's completely cleared up, and Bob's looking over here going, how come Seattle is there? That's not right. There's something wrong with this picture. And Bob slowly realizes that he's like, might have done something wrong, right? You see the problem with it, right? That's how you get violated, right? When you do a cross-country flight, even if it's a short flight, you still have to figure out the wind correction angle and the variation, right? I mean, typically, are you going to be on top of the clouds? No. But it's just important for planning because you do have areas where there's airspace like this, where there's Class Bravo airspace. You know, you've got to pay attention to that, and you want to make sure that, especially if you're going to be going close to it, that you have the proper heading, that you're flying the proper magnetic heading, right? So remember, it's true course, you know, plus or minus the wind correction angle gives you the true heading, right? Then it's the true heading plus or minus the variation, and that gives you the magnetic heading. And then you have that thing called deviation, which is 1 or 2 degrees for the compass correction card inside the airplane. It just has to do with the electronic interference of that. But anyhow, you can see the problem. So let's go back to Olympia and let's set it up properly. We'll take off, and I think the heading is going to be 333 is going to be the correct one. But yeah, Bob's busted. Man, not good, Bob. All right. Yeah, but Bob doesn't fly with a medical, and anyway, isn't that a medical in 30 years? And again, there's guys like that out there. It drives me up the wall. But yeah, Cavalier pilots, they exist. Okay, so we're back on the ground here in Olympia. So let's do the math really quick. Remember the true course. It aligned with the line of longitude. So we know that that was 360 or 000, right? Same thing. 001, well 360 001, but at 359 360. So it aligned with the longitude. So what we have to do is take that true course and subtract the variation, the wind correction angle, right? So that's what we need to do first. So you can see the wind was out of the west. You see how it's west up there? And then what we have here is the wind was blowing to 20 knots. So we'll put that right on the 20. So you start from 100, then you go up to 120 knots. That signifies 20 knots of wind, right? So then what you do is turn this to our true course. So our true course is 360 degrees, right? And then what you need to do is align. You put the wind grommet on the true airspeed of 110 knots. So we're going to move that right up here, 110 knots, because you can see the 110 knot line, and so we put the wind. So it looks like we have a 10-degree left wind correction angle. So if the true course is 360, what's 360 minus 10? That's a 350 heading, right? So we have the 350 heading. Well, now we have to take into consideration the next thing, which is the variation, because we took the true course, which was 360 minus the wind correction angle, gave us a true heading of 350 degrees, right? I think you follow. Because remember, you're turning into the wind, right? You can see it. The wind's off your left, the wind's off the left. You got to point the nose into the wind, right? You don't go the other direction. Okay, so now that we have the true heading, right? We took true course plus or minus wind correction angle, gave us true heading of 350 degrees. Well, now we have to compensate for that magnetic anomaly interference that goes on, known as variation, right? Where you can see that it says 16 degrees east. Let me zoom in. See where it says 16 degrees east? So we take that 350 heading and then take 16 degrees off of that, right? What does that give us? 334 degrees. So now you can see that how Bob was flying out that way. Now all of a sudden we're starting to kind of get it in the right direction, 334 degrees. And we'll just say for this particular Cessna, my airplane 2 and Echo, when you're flying on a northerly heading, there is no compass correction, so there's nothing for D. So we're just going to fly. D means deviation, the electronic and various metals interference with the magnetic compass. It can happen at different headings. North and minus 0, east minus, I think, 1 degree, south minus 0, and then west, I think I have to add 2 degrees to that. So it'd be 3. If you're flying west, it'd be the 334 heading plus 2, right? So it'd be a 336. So you can see that D is, but in my airplane, there is no compass correction when you're flying north in that deviation. So now we have a magnetic heading of 334. Okay, so you can see now, instead of putting the compass heading on north, because that's not what it is, we've corrected for wind correction angle and variation. So you can see now I have the heading bug, compass heading bug on a 334 heading, right? Disregard this number right here. Okay, I've got 4,500 feet set in there, so once we take off, we'll just turn the autopilot on and we'll fly it in heading mode, and we'll use the vertical speed mode to climb up to 4,500 feet, and then it'll level itself off. And the weather on this particular flight is a lot better than on Bob's flight, so... Unfortunately for Bob, he flew in a day that was not so good, right? So that's what happens when You don't plan for your cross country and you fly over the top of weather and can't see the ground. So let's see what happens on this 334 heading. Let's see how this works out. All right, so we took off, and for whatever reason, the airplane went in a roll mode, and I'm looking at going, where's this thing going? Now I put it back in a heading select. I don't know why it popped out of it, but flight simulator ism, right? It's easier to fly it than it is to fly this, believe me. So anyhow, you can see that right now it looks like we're just going to parallel this course going outbound, right? You can see there's a little, the airplane's cocked into the wind. Here's the true course right here. Let me just go direct enter. Direct, and I'm going to go enter, and that will give me, here's the GPS right here. I'll zoom in on this. See how my heading is 334-ish, 335-ish. I'm in heading mode, you can see right here. But this is the GPS. As long as I keep that line centered, that means that I'm tracking straight down that line, right? That I'm tracking straight to the airport. So let it fly a bit, come back to it, and see how close we get just by using that method. I'm not going to use GPS because that would be cheating. I'm not going to put it in navigation mode, because if I put it in navigation mode, then it just follows the GPS, right? So I'm just going to leave it in heading mode, and let's see how accurate this is when we get up there. So, all right, be back in a bit. Well, so far we're looking pretty good, aren't we? Look at that. That's just by setting a heading with the wind correction angle and the variation, right? One thing I forgot to mention right in here, the reason I picked 4,500 feet. There's an obstacle right here at 3,440 feet. You can see there's one here at 2,800. Then you can see there's this stuff here up to 3,000. That's this stuff right here that we're looking at. You can see it right in here. So yeah, 4,500 feet. I've flown this route probably hundreds of times. And yeah, it's super scenic, but yeah, this is a lot of terrain. So yeah, you need to take a look at your routing, and also take a look at the highest terrain around there and any other obstacles you might encounter along the route. It's all part of flight planning. Okay, so to wrap it up, you can see right now we have Whidbey Island Naval Air Station. We're at 4,500 feet. We're right on the money. I mean, that's just how it is. It's not always going to be that great, because this is flight simulator, and it's been a constant 20 knots blowing out the side, right? And it's going to vary when you do a cross country. It might be 12 knots, and then it hits 20, and then it goes to 25, whatever. It's kind of hard to get it, but because this is flight sim, it just held steady. But it's good to see how wind correction angle and adding the variation, subtracting those, in this case from the true course, gave us a magnetic course to fly, or magnetic heading, right? So that's pretty much it. 4,000 feet they're required, below 1,300 feet, and above 4,000 feet out here. And yeah, I think we'll just wrap it up here. But yeah, you can see we're heading to Orcas. Orcas Island's just coming up straight ahead here. So yeah, that's how all that works. All right, see you later. Bye.